If you're like me and eat Kentucky Fried Chicken for breakfast, you're probably also a big fan of the comic book. Because, well, if you're a toy collector and a movie fan, comic books tend to bring it all together these days, right? Almost literally. And when you see a comic book, usually you know that it's a part of a larger story. I mean, there are standalone comic books and one-shots, but for the most part, comic books tend to be, well, especially these days, released in six parts because that makes a good graphic novel. And why would you want to do this? Well, because when you combine them all together into one book, you can sell it at a bookstore, not just a comic book shop. Now, it's also good for hardcore fans that while they may have every individual issue of their favorite hero, there's advantages to owning the collected trade paperbacks. Most notably because you can keep your single issues in mint condition and read your trade paperbacks and not worry about it, although there are definitely people who collect those and keep them mint. But, I mean, have you ever tried traveling on an airplane with a single comic book? It's madness! Madness, I tell you! And that's one of the reasons I love getting graphic novels of my favorite stories. And every time you see a graphic novel, well, much like when you see a comic book, you can see it as a part of a larger story. A graphic novel represents ideally the complete story, or, part one of a complete story. But at least you're going to get something that's going to feel like it's got a start and an end. It's a combination of stories originally released as single issues that have now been bound together in order to tell either a more complete story, a more portable story, or, well, hey, sometimes even an Eisner Award-winning story. And that's really the whole point. That's why graphic novels exist. It's an easier, more compatible way of reading stories, and hey, you can even have giant graphic novels that have an entire series. And again, it's because these can then be sold at bookstores, at big box stores. There's a lot more retail space for a graphic novel than there is a single thin comic book. All right, so why am I talking all about this? Well, because I'm relating it back to books. You remember books? You know, these things we read in high school? You remember how thick they were, especially compared to modern novels? And you ever wonder why all of these books that were written in the 1800s tend to be, well, not just books, but giant paperweights or the bane of your existence in senior AP English? Because, yeah, they could basically, if you took one of these books and whacked someone with it, you weren't just going to swat a fly in their head, you could probably hurt them. They're pretty big bricks. And there's a reason for that, and their connection to comic books. First off, most of the authors of these books were paid by the word. And this is why the storylines in them tend to be not convoluted, but wander off from the main plot, would be a good way of putting it. An excellent example is from my favorite novel of all time, The Count of Monte Cristo by Andre Dumas. In this book, the Count, in his revenge plot, has about 100-page sojourn, kind of like a video game mini-quest, where he goes to Italy and arranges to meet certain characters that are going to pay off later on in the book, almost 800 pages later. But the sojourn kind of goes on and on and on, almost for 100 pages, and you're like, come on, get to the revenging already. Like, enough with this hanging out in Italy. But again, when you're paid by the word, you're going to send your characters off on side quests. It makes sense because every side quest is another paycheck. And most of these books were first published in magazines because that was how the average reader was able to afford them. They would come out in monthly editions, just like comic books, and you had different magazines themed for different parts of the population, different, different readership levels, different education levels, and sometimes even the authors owned their own magazine, like Dickens, who had year-round, which is where he published most of his work, because, well, when you own the, publishing house. So yes, A Tale of Two Cities was first published not as a book, but rather as a series of chapters, and each chapter was available in All the Year-Round magazine, where when you picked it up, then, hey, you got the latest installment of Oliver Twist, or the Bleak House, or all of his work, David Copperfield, etc., etc. And when you read these old books, you'll also notice that almost every chapter tends to end on a cliffhanger, even if the cliffhanger is easily cleaned up in a paragraph in the next issue. And this never-ending series of cliffhangers is basically because of the same thing that we have today with monthly comic books. The authors wanted their readers to buy an issue, and then want to know what happens. That's why everything ended with a, "And what? Oh my gosh." It was kind of like Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights. It was basically like, "Thank you, come again, I'll finish the story next time, and I'm going to leave you wanting more." Now, it wasn't just structure of stories, the way they were published, or the way they would leave their readers wanting more after every chapter. There were sort of, I guess you could say, your crazy fans of these books, just as much as we have today of people lining up to get the latest edition or the latest chapter. And this is best illustrated, and probably a great historical example is Dickens' Curiosity Shop, which is one of his earlier novels. And while, again, you can buy it today, like all of his novels, as one solid book, if you wanted to read it back in the 1800s and learn what was going to be the fate of the two main characters, which was left on a cliffhanger at the end, and, well, it left people having to guess whether
will live and which one will die. Pass.
All right, well, if you haven't read the old Curiosity Shop and learned the fate of Little Nell, I will spare that for you and not go into any spoiler alerts for a 200-year-old book. But this caused riots, and I don't mean riots of people angry over Little Nell's fate, but rather people rioting to get a copy of the last issue or the last chapter in the magazine, wanting to know what happened. And people actually stormed the docks when the ship arrived with copies, jumping, basically ripping the cargo of issues, because they were so in demand, wanting to know how this book was going to climax. So yes, crazy fan riots, not something that is just a modern movie and comic book audience behavior. So yeah, next time you're in a comic book store, or next time you're in a bookstore, there's a huge connection between the two media. They were both offered monthly, they both have climaxes, and they both tend to wander off on side quests to sell more issues. Hey, reading is reading, and as long as you're enjoying it and having good stories to explore, whatever characters, situations, and stories appeal to you, that's wonderful. But I definitely recommend some Victorian literature. While it is lengthy, it's worth it, and the connections to modern comic books are undeniable. I mean, heck, let's just look at modern Marvel movies. You remember this guy? Well, I mean, I know he doesn't look like this in the movies, but Hawkeye, shoots a bow and arrow, has really good aim. Well, this character, Hawkeye, is named after Natty Bumppo, the character from Last of the Mohicans, The Pioneers, who was also known as Hawkeye because he was a great shot. And continuing with our Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man's AI Friday, also named after a character from literature, in Robinson Crusoe. His personal assistant, yeah, let's go with that, was named Friday. Or, what about good old, Dr. Pym from Ant-Man and the Wasp, or, the Marvel Universe proper? Well, that comes from Edgar Allan Poe's The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym, which is crazy because this story actually had a sequel written by an entirely different author, Jules Verne. An Antarctic mystery addressed the ending to Edgar Allan Poe's book. Is this considered fan fiction? I don't know. But yeah, craziness. So yes, take some advice from the world's smartest people, Yoda and Taylor Swift. Read, because when you read classic literature, it gives you an amazing open window to modern literature and comic books and the connections. It really is an eye-opening experience. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and it's been some interesting highlights of the connections between comic books, modern literature, distribution, story beats, and, well, general distribution and fan bases. Amazing how some things just never change. Any help sharing this video is most appreciated. It's the best way to show support for this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.